Hey channel, Fernando from SkyFi Audio. Today I'm going to do a review on this Luxman LX-380 integrated amplifier, a Japanese-made unit that has won our hearts over for both his aesthetics, performance, and build quality. So I'm going to divide this into a couple of parts. We're going to go over the design and features, connections. We'll take a look at the front, we'll take a look at the back. Then we'll compare it a bit to its vintage sort of brother, to kind of understand why it looks the way it does and what Luxman is trying to do with it. Then we're going to take it over to the test bench. We're going to crack it open, take a look at the inside, the controls, the build quality, the component selection, try to understand a bit about what Luxman intended to do with this piece, and then we'll run it through its paces. We're going to run it at full power, do some measurements, and kind of see how it performs from more of a technical than just a listening position. So hang in there, it's probably going to be around 20-25 minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Oh, before I do, if you like our videos, please like and subscribe. It helps us stay motivated, and it helps keep bringing these videos to you. It's really, really important to us that you do, and of course, as always, please leave any comments or feedback down below. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's about your own system or about a comment on the review we just did. Please go ahead and collaborate with us. So jumping right in, this is a demo unit. It's about a year old. It has been out on a showroom floor, and it's made its way over to us, and we're super happy to have it here. I just unboxed it. It came really nicely packed. It's a double super high quality box with foam inserts, really well presented. So we're fairly confident, since most of our business is over the internet. We like to find and seek good packaging materials to make sure that there's no disappointment along the way. So kudos to Luxman to ensuring these things travel well around the world. Doesn't come with much. Actually doesn't need much, since it isn't integrated. We've got a really high quality remote made of some sort of aluminum extrusion with the ability to control volume and mute. And also it's got basic controls in case you've got another Luxman piece like a CD player. Came with safety information and a pretty low quality manual, but well, good content, just the sort of quality is a bit below what you'd expect. And let's talk about that first. This is not an inexpensive piece. This is close to $8,000 MSRP here in the United States, which puts it in a really tough competition space. The under $10,000 integrated amplifier space is pretty crowded. So this is going to have to deliver, since it's going to be up towards a higher range of the $10,000 category. So first things, it is aesthetically a vintage looking piece, and we love to see that. Here at SkyFi Audio, we love vintage equipment. Almost everything we sell is some form of vintage, and we love to kind of mix and marry the two. When we put together systems for clients, which we often do as a complete system through our Stereo Concierge program, which you can see on our website, we like to sort of source a good concoction of both. Sometimes we'd like to put a modern preamp or with a vintage amplifier, vintage speakers with a modern amplifier. We kind of mix and match. So it's really nice when a brand like this offers a modern piece with a vintage look. In order to attain that sort of vintage look, Luxman combined aluminum front faceplate, aluminum anodized, a bunch of sort of vintagey looking knobs, and a wooden cabinet. This was very, very typical of 1960s, 70s, and they sure recreated it. Even this sort of top cover here that houses the tubes goes back quite a few years for Luxman. So to give you a sense of the aesthetic, here I pulled from our inventory. This is a coveted piece. This is a CL35 MK3. This is a preamp instead of an integrated, but you can see the same design language. We've got a nice wooden cabinet, a beautiful extruded aluminum faceplate. The power button is almost identical, or the LED indicator. The knobs are very similar, and instead of these plastic inserts, which I'm not a big fan of, they've gone to more of like a sleek Pioneer looking button. And then the rotary knobs are very similar as well. They're just a little bit more sleek and they feel a lot better on this modern unit. So pretty much about the same sort of look. These could get mixed and matched and sort of trick someone into thinking they're both from the same period. All right, let's look into the features. I'm gonna put the camera down because I do wobble way too much, as many of you have pointed out. So starting from left to right, we've got a power button on the top right here. It's an actual physical power button, which we like to see. And across the plate, you'll find here the power on indicator. And then a little further to the right, you'll see the infrared receiver. That's so that the remote can receive signals. First set of grouping of knobs, these 4 knobs here, are tone controls. It's a little bit confusing how they're labeled, but essentially these 2 control the bass and these 2 control the treble. And the best way to imagine it is the bass frequencies are divided into 150, 300, 600 hertz. So you can kind of choose which of those core frequencies you want to alter. So I am now at 300 hertz, and the bass knob is essentially just a gain or an attenuator for the 300 hertz frequency. So I can increase or decrease 300 hertz. So this would allow me to dial in the bass frequency. So if I had a fairly large speaker and I wanted to get a little bit more bass out of it, I would go probably down to the 150 and increase its bass frequency. The treble is exact same thing, but it's between 1.5, 3, and 6,000 hertz. So the attenuators here, I would select the top frequency. So why do we see tone controls in a piece like this? Yes, things in the 60s and 70s all had tone controls, but most high-end modern preamps no longer do. But we like to see tone controls on these pieces. It's a real great tool for us. Since we often will mix this with a vintage speaker, it's nice to have tone controls to get a little bit more extra from them. You know, they may be a little lacking in bass or treble or mid, and having a slight tone control that has somewhat of an effect, not a tremendous effect, but a sort of like a light effect, is a great tool to get the most out of vintage gear in particular. With a modern speaker, you probably wouldn't want to mess with it, but with vintage speakers, it's really handy. All right, moving on to the right set of, the central set of switches, we've got the line straight. Kind of weird wording, but I imagine this lets you bypass the tone circuitry altogether. Next to it is the loudness. This is so that when you play in low volumes, you can attenuate or sort of emphasize some of the high and low end frequencies to get a little bit more dynamics out of a low volume playback. This is great for listening at nighttime or in a quiet environment. Subsonic filter will take some of the low end frequencies to eliminate rumble from a turntable. That's probably the only case you'd want to use this, unless you're maybe recording from AM or FM or something like that. Mono stereo, that's self-explanatory, and obviously this integrated can do phono, so this will let you choose between a moving coil and a moving magnet phono input. Top knob is a straight input selector, pretty straightforward. Lines 1 through 4, including phono. And then below, we've got the ability to turn on and off 2 pairings of speaker outputs, A and B. You can have them both off, or you could have both on, or individually A and B. The monitor switch allows you to send the signal to a tape deck in case you want to do some recording. And the separate, it's a great function, and it'll be a little bit more clear when we look at the back. This allows you to separate the preamp stage from the amplification stage in case you want to use this in a different method, in case you want to use this, for example, as a standalone preamp. And I'll talk more about this in a bit. Volume control is self-explanatory, and this is a good feeling volume control. Unlike some of the more vintage ones, for example, on the vintage piece, this one is a stepped attenuator. This has physical indents in it. They've gone to a smooth volume control on this piece, and that's mostly because of the technology they're claiming to be using in this piece. It is an 88-step computerized attenuator. So I'm not quite sure what that means just yet, but I suspect that once we crack this open, we'll have a better sense of what they did. And then below the balance, and that's pretty much it. Nice simple operation. Pretty much anyone that walks up to this piece is going to understand how to use it, which is also a nice feature. It's got the nice engraved Luxman logo in here in the bottom right hand corner. Looks like they machined it right into the faceplate, which is pretty cool. I noticed in the vintage piece this would have been silkscreen, so it's a nice touch. All right, the top cabinet looks like some sort of rosewood finish on here, or a mahogany, better yet. And the top plate for changing the tubes. An interesting fact, this piece does come with a 3-year warranty for the original owner. And for the first time that I remember seeing, they're actually warranting the tubes as well for 3 years, meaning that if you don't remove them from their sockets and you don't mess with them, they will be covered under a 3-year warranty, which is really impressive for an amplifier. Most of them always exclude the tubes from the warranty because they don't really know how much you're going to use the piece, and tubes have a finite lifespan, so I imagine Luxman is running these fairly conservatively to be able to extend that sort of warranty, which we'd love to see. All right, the back panel is really high quality as well. They took the trouble to powder coat and also use super high quality gold-plated inputs and outputs. So from the left to the right, we've got the phono, the ground plus the phono input. And just by looking at the panel, we now understand that there's in fact just one phono input. Even though we've got the ability to select between moving coil and moving magnet, they're not two separate phono inputs. You're actually just selecting what you want for that one input. And then the 4 line inputs, fairly straightforward. This will hook up CD players, streamers, tuners, you name it. And they're not labeled, so you'd have to remember what you've done. All right, this recording and record out and monitor allows us to hook up a tape deck. And then the pre-out and the main in, this is tied to that switch in the front panel we talked about. So let's say you wanted to start with this unit and down the road you decided that you wanted to use an external amplifier because you wanted to maybe double the power or expand to another zone or do something a little fancier. It's a great upgrade path for an integrated amplifier when you have the ability to separate the inputs from the outputs, because you could then repurpose this unit as a preamp and use an external amplifier. So great output, great upgrade path. Now, why do we have so many speaker outputs? Well, first of all, they're set up into bags. Remember, we had a knob in the front for A and B. Well, those correspond to A and B here. So this would allow you to, for example, set up 2 speakers in the same listening area, or even maybe set up a second zone, maybe an outdoor set of speakers or a dining room. Very common for older stuff, not so common on new equipment, but they're bringing it back. And then the fact that we've got the impedance ratings down below. Here it's stating that load impedance at A plus B is 8 through 16 ohms, and A or B is 4 through 16 ohms. So you have to be careful how much you load this up in terms of impedance. All right, let's talk about the specifications on it. First, the output power. That's the most critical piece on here. It's a low power unit. It uses a pair of 6L6 GCs for the output stage, and those are capable of about 20 watts at 8 ohms. So we'll put this on the bench later and figure out what sort of wattage we get out of this unit, but figure somewhere between 16 to 20 watts, depending on the impedance of your speaker. And that's great for a lot of speakers. Most people overpower their speakers. They buy 300, 400, 500 watt amplifiers while 10, 20, 30 watt amplifier would suffice. And that's where the magic sits. If you're able to utilize a lower power amplifier, you're usually going to get a better result than utilizing a high powered amplifier and wasting all those watts. So this would not need to be matched carefully with the speaker. You certainly can't match it with a low efficiency speaker that's, let's say 85 dBs. You'd have to match this up with something 90 plus dBs to get the full range and volume out of it. Most vintage speakers were very, very high efficiency. So if you pick up a set of JBL L100s or 3343s or anything sort of 70s, 60s, chances are 20 watts is more than enough. It also utilizes 3 ECC82s in the driver stage, and I can kind of see them from the top here. And we'll take a look inside a bit and see more of what that looks like. The manual is a pretty simple affair. It doesn't talk about its build or design or intent, which is also often a bummer. I like to hear from manufacturers as to how they selected components and what their philosophy was for it. This is more of like a nuts and bolts kind of user manual, going over the knobs and the functions, and then how to hook things up to speakers and sources. Here's a pretty simple page illustrating the different components you'd hook up to this, including the 2 speaker systems we talked about, A and B. So pretty straightforward stuff. Nothing. Well, they do give a nice block diagram showing here's a pair of output tubes here. Yeah, here's the ECC82s, all 3 of them, and here's a pair of output tubes. So this represents a single channel. All right, so 20 watts times or plus 20 watts at 6 ohms is the rated power. Harmonic distortion is at 1% or less. What else is interesting here? Not much else. 17 kilograms for the amplifier. All right, that covers the basic stuff. Now let's get it over to the bench and take a peek inside. I've taken the cover off and we're going to take a look at the components inside. So the first thing I notice is the operation does have a delay to allow the tubes to warm up. So when you push on the power button, you can see we're only consuming about 1.3 amps, and this is going to blink for a little while until the tubes warm up. Very typical, but it's nice that it's muted while it's booting up. All right, taking a look inside. The first thing that is evident is that this is not a fully tubed integrated. The output stage or the amplifier stage is running tubes, as we can see for the pair of output tubes plus the inverters here. And the preamp section is likely to be a combination between this board and the back board. The volume control is fed into this board here, along with all the tone controls and the selection controls. So this is some sort of digital control for volume, tone, and selections. Actually, not the selection. I did notice that as I flip these switches here, you can hear all the clicking of relays. So nice short signal path stays within the back pane of the chassis, which we like to see. So the signal is fairly well contained to the back boards, where you can hear the relays and all different functions click. So selection is all in the back and control is in the front. Here's our main power transformer for input, and here are our output transformers for both left and right speakers. Seems like they're using a single tap on those. The driver or the output tubes, inverters, and the board there. The volume control, as we discussed earlier, it is motorized and it is digital, so it's fed in through this ribbon cable, or this individual cable into this control board here. So it's some sort of computer volume control is happening on this board. They've got a fancy name for it, some sort of 88-step attenuator. I'm not going to dive into that. It's over my head, but it's likely contained in this board here. All right, the phono section is going to be sitting somewhere probably on this board behind, close to the input jacks. So phono stage is also solid state. Again, the tube section is only for the amplifier. So let me flip this up on its side so you can see the bottom. This is where it gets impressive. Although we're not seeing obviously point-to-point wiring. This is a PC board sort of design. You see a lot less manufacturers nowadays use point-to-point wiring. A lot of gurus will tell you that's the only way to do a tube amp. I think it's debatable either way. Luxman chose to do everything on multi-layered, super high-quality PC boards. And the first thing that strikes here is the quality of components. We're seeing an Ichicon capacitors in the signal paths. We're seeing Luxman branded capacitors in the power supply stage. really good attention to detail. The routing for the wiring is all very neat and tidy, which we don't often see. We've seen horrible messes, regardless of the price range. So obviously Luxman took great care. They even epoxied or glued some of the capacitors, the larger ones, to the board to make sure they don't come rattling off. It's also very serviceable. They did use connectors whenever possible. Fuses are all grouped together, easy to access. Here you can see some of the switching devices for these are probably the relays for the A and B speaker selector sitting right out next to the posts. So overall, really nice construction. I'm very pleased. Chassis is all either powder coated or painted. A little bit back around. Give you a different view. So this is the front of the chassis here, and this is the rear. Pretty crowded back here on the connecting blocks. But there's not a lot of heat carried back in these particular areas, so it's fairly acceptable practice. Okay, now I'm going to hook it up and let's see what sort of output we get from this. All right, we've got this hooked up to our test rig, and now we're going to go through some basic testing. Now, this is not in any way intended to be a scientific review where we go in and measure all sorts of parameters. This is just an output test and a basic functionality test. So with that being it, the first thing I noticed is that cool feature, when you get right about to the 0 mark here, you hear a clicking, which means that clicking is coming from a relay back here in the selection stage. So it's actually muting the outputs as you approach 0 for the volume control. The other thing I noticed, well, let me show you the rig. So we're feeding a 1K signal at 1 volt into the input 1. And then we're feeding it out to the Sencore power analyzer up there. And then the analyzer is giving us a signal out to the oscilloscope so we can kind of visualize what's happening here. So the first thing I did notice is that as we go through the volume selection, you can actually see the 88 steps of attenuation. I haven't gone as far as counting them, but as we start reaching this right now, we are at 5 watts of output. You can kind of see the incremental steps in volume. So I suspect 88 steps is enough. I am feeding a 1 volt signal and I'm reaching maximum power at about 50% of volume control, which is acceptable range. And so out of the 88 steps, it's more like you're probably going to be using more like 50 or 60 steps, which is, I think, ample enough for the average listener. I prefer a continuously variable volume control, but as far as step attenuators, 88 steps seems to be a nice range. The other thing I noticed is that when we do the bypass, when we bypass the tone controls, we're also bypassing the balance control, which is nice. So for example, I'm going to go full right here. Now we're showing just the right channel. If I turn on the bypass, now we've got both channels illustrated. So it's taking out quite a few features in here. I suspect it's going to take out the subsonic as well. All right, so let me go back to center position. I'm going to go ahead and increase the volume. Right now we're measuring 10 watts. We're using the lower range here, the 0 to 25 scale here. And so as I crank up the power, right about one more step from here, right there, we start seeing distortion at the top of the sine wave. And we are measuring about 17 watts, which is right within the specification and right within the comfort zone of this dual output tubes. So it's delivering what they promised. A quick update on the output power. Ben keenly noticed that my isolation transformer was set to 105, 109 volts here. So I wasn't giving this amplifier enough current. So sure enough, if we bring this up to 120, we'll find the extra missing watts from the design. So back to finding the edge of distortion, which is right there. Sure enough, we're now just about 20 watts, just shy of 20 watts in here, and we are set to an 8 ohm dummy load. So this is appropriate. Wasn't too concerned about it, but I'm glad that we caught this. And 120 watts or volts. All right, I think that wraps it up. Overall, I'm very happy with this piece. I do wish it was an all tube unit, but I understand at this price point and in this packaging, to fit all the additional hardware required to make it all tubes would have been a tight fit, and they probably would have to given up some cleanliness or noise in the process. So overall, cool piece. I wouldn't buy this if you plan on separating the two. You remember we talked about earlier about separating the preamp from the output. It'd be a crime to spend $9,000 and integrate it and then take the best part of it, which is the amplification section, and not use it. So I would purchase this unit if you're looking to actually use it as intended. That covers everything. Thanks for watching. I've enjoyed making this video for you. If you did as well, please leave us some feedback and subscribe to the channel. And also visit us online, skyfiaudio.com. We've got hundreds of pieces of equipment available. And then also once a week, if you subscribe to our channel, we'll do a sort of new revivals of all the equipment that has come in over the last month, which is always tons and tons of stuff. So you can see from a quick panning of our shop. Here I am working on a GX747 from Akai. Yes, I understand that is sideways. Ben is here fighting with this Audio Research VT200 amplifier with a gazillion tubes, and very finicky design, but we'll sort through it. And skyfiaudio.com is the website. I appreciate you watching.